Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's edition of HR Mentorship Learning, Conducting Disciplinary Proceedings at the Workplace. My name is Oluyemi Adeosun, and we'll be going through this journey together. We'll talk about disciplinary proceedings at the workplace in general. Okay, while it may appear that the focus of this session is on DC itself, but we'll also talk a little about the disciplinary process. And you know the way we do it. At the end of the session, we can all indicate our interest to share our experience, contribute to the conversation, and also ask questions as the case may be. I hope that everybody on this call probably knows me, but just in case you don't know me, I have over 23 years of experience in HR. I'm also double as an economist. I've worked quite a number of in my to being to I think to this may not mean anything. I have memory quite a number of things. This the looks possible at the discipline in and look at some of I think we need to take internet to DC. I have like 3 internet sources here, and they are still misbehaving. I'm trying to put on this, ensure that this is working. All right, but stay with me. All right, so we'll look at objectivity and critical thinking from each panel of the DCs. Also look at NIC's position on staff disciplinary matters, NIC's National Industrial Court, just in case anybody doesn't know that, and it's okay not to know. We'll also look at the fact-finding process. I will show you just one sample query, very short query, because it's also part of the process, and sometimes some people don't write queries well. That's one thing I've noticed, because sometimes in court, how you script a query may make it ineffective or null and void. We also look at levels of DC hearing, because there can be levels, so that we also appreciate it. The roles of the panel members. Also, like a bonus, also how to run a great virtual DC, because sometimes it's not disciplinary committee meetings that are physical, it can be virtual too. Then how do you interpret sanctions? Because it's one thing to have a policy, it's one thing to have a code, a disciplinary code. It's another thing to interpret it appropriately. All right, we also look at some code of offenses, and then we also look at some timelines. All right, and then also, how do you appeal a DC if it can be appealed? And what can be a good ground for an appeal of a DC internally? And then what can be termed as fair hearing or unfair hearing? And I'll give you a few suggestions. This is, of course, based on my experience on certain prevalent infractions. Also, I've seen situations where there are some offenses, people don't know how to couch so to speak, a policy and a sanction around it, all things being equal, you get to see it. If you are with me, you agree to some extent. And you are also free to disagree that looking at this course outline, you're already learning already. I think confirm to me in the chat box if you have seen something, maybe for example, maybe you don't even know you can appeal a DC, or you've never heard of it. So if there's anything already that looks interesting to you from this course outline, you can drop it in the chat box. And again, outside this course outline, if there's anything directly or indirectly associated with disciplinary process, if you bring it up, we'll also look at it. Note, we are focusing strictly around the disciplinary process. All right, so having said that, I need to put this disclaimer up front. You know, any little thing I will go to court. The session today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm placing this on record, is advisory in nature. It does not in any way substitute professional legal advice. Everything that will be shared today is at best a suggestion and should not be misconstrued as law, a template, or a standard. Okay, your context may differ, and what we aim to do here is to provide understanding and appreciation for fair hearing, due process, and how to achieve a disciplined workforce. Okay, so, you know, I'm saying this respectfully. I don't want somebody so Oluyemi Adeosun said, maybe your context may be peculiar. And every peculiar context, you need to get a legal advice. All right. And it's also safe to get second opinion. Even the best of medical doctors sometimes reach out for second opinion. I'm not afraid or ashamed to say it. Many instances, even when I felt I knew what to do, I called 2, 3, 4, 5 HR practitioners. Some are even on this call right now. And people also who are even, in quote, senior to me or at part to me in the profession also call me, all right, so that we run ideas through each other. Ladies and gentlemen, all right, even though we are talking about discipline, you know, one of the intended outcomes of a disciplined workforce is productivity. And that's why we're looking at this quote, you know, like an icebreaker. All right, Martin Luther King said that if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures, sweep streets like Beethoven composed music, sweep streets like Leontel Price sings before the Metropolitan Opera, sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry, sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lives a great street sweeper who swept his job well. Ladies and gentlemen, in discipline, we not allow any employee attain, sustain greatness. You know, and permit me to also quote this man, okay, also late, you know, his name is Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar, I can't remember whether it is from Colombia or Ecuador, one of those two countries. You know, he's a reputable drug pusher, drug dealer. And he said something. He said, a drug dealer that takes drugs will soon go down. Again, I'm trying to show us the importance of discipline. Even in the underworld, in the world of crime, a drug pusher, they say don't get high on your own weed, on your own drugs. So even if, in quotes, want to be great, so to speak, in a bad deed, you need to be what? Disciplined. Ladies and gentlemen, disciplinary policy and procedure is what? The entire framework. Processes which establish code of what? Behavior. Regulate employee conduct in order to maintain what? A balance of conduct in the workplace. You know, they say give an individual an inch and they will go what? A mile. Take dressing, and I'm saying this in context now, take dressing. If you leave all of us to dress the way we like to work, as in from our heart, it will not be unlikely that one or two men here will not feel like wearing a top. Why? The weather is hot. They just want to wear boxers and go to work. And they may do a very great job. I will use guys, I won't say more than that. But we need to now say, oh, this is the dress code Yeah. Now, when we talk about dress code, for example, you see, it does not necessarily mean that a particular dress appearance is good or bad. Let me give you an example. If you wear agbada and you're an engineer, you climb, I hope you know that agbada is completely inappropriate. While if you are a board member going for a board meeting, that may be a perfect dress. So it's not necessarily about good or bad. It may also be about what? Appropriateness. And the policy, organizational policy, disciplinary policy, all employee handbook helps us from a level of appropriateness and context determine what is sustainable for the organization. So the procedure also sets out process of discipline of abhorrent conduct, in other words, negative or bad conduct when same arises, and also sets out reward for sustained good behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, even though we'll finish on time, but I'll pause here for like 30 seconds. And I want you to ponder. Please stay with me. I need your full attention tonight. This will liberate your career. Look at this again. The procedure also sets out process of discipline of abhorrent conduct when same arises. Pause. Then play. Also set out what? Reward for sustained good behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, in the chat box, all the disciplinary policy you see, you are aware of, does this speak to reward? Does this speak to rewards for sustained good behavior? We need to debuse our mind that disciplinary process or procedure is all about sanction, sanction, sanction. If I check your disciplinary process now, will I see any connection with reward for sustained good behavior? Again, I know that in many organizations, some of the reward for sustained good behavior may be in some other policies. It may be in the reward and recognition. For example, compensation and benefits, total reward. That all the policies in the organization, directly and indirectly, are jointly related or part of disciplinary policy. How far against the justification for efficiency of running employers' business, safety in relations, efficiency of running safety and sound, effectiveness of direction for bad or negative behavior. Disciplinary, they also want to ensure fair.
Ladies and gentlemen, kindly bear with us. The network of Dr. Adele Showing is misbehaving. We hope that he will be able to get a stable network shortly and be able to come back to the call. Please just bear with us. Don't go nowhere. Just hold on and we will try and resolve these network issues shortly. Thank you. Thank you. Please keep the information coming. I can see you, Olayori Ogunfobi. You're calling, you're joining from Ogun State. Omonowa Hikioya Favor from Abuja. I can see Edward Davis from Sierra Leone. I can see Ruth Okoro joining from Port Harcourt. I can see Wofai and Ogbonga connecting from Port Harcourt also. This is Ginika. Thank you so much for joining, Ginika. Joel, thank you for joining from Lagos. I can see Oge Bori, Frank from Port Harcourt. We have quite a number of people from Port Harcourt on this call. I can see Judith Puputa also from Port Harcourt. Yes, we have some network challenge currently, but I'm sure he will soon be back in a minute. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Uncle K. Anytime I'm taking off, just continue the conversation, please, so that we don't have gaps in the recording. Thank you again. All right. So we are talking about disciplinary policy and procedure, and I wanted to just give an example of a fair and equitable treatment of all employees. So it so happened that one day, a professional colleague, HR, called me, and he said to me that the wife of the MD came to see the MD one morning, on a Monday morning. Now, the cleaner who was cleaning was using earpiece. According to the cleaner, she didn't see the wife of the MD, and she was focused on her cleaning. The wife of the MD now claimed that she greeted the cleaner, and the cleaner did not even respond or acknowledge her, and told the MD. Then the MD called the HR and told the HR to fire the cleaner. For what? In quotes, disrespect. And the HR guy called me. He somehow didn't feel it was okay to sack the cleaner for not greeting the wife of the MD, even though, of course, nobody will, at least in this part of the world, say it is good not to greet the wife of the MD. And I just asked my HR colleague, one question, and he gave him perspective. I said, let us flip it. Imagine it was the MD that the cleaner greeted in the morning, and the MD did not respond or acknowledge the cleaner. Are we going to sack the MD for not greeting the cleaner? He said, of course, no. Then I said, the case is settled. Because if, in quotes, the cleaner stole money and there's evidence of theft, what do you think will happen? We have grounds to terminate or dismiss the cleaner based on what? Theft. But ladies and gentlemen, if the MD also steals, we have the same grounds to terminate or dismiss if you have evidence. So you can see equal treatment now. So if it is one party that does something and makes it an offense, but the other party does the same thing and is not an offense, you see why you need to have policies in place to guide. I just said, let me drop that example as we proceed. Now, sources of workplace disciplinary procedures are both internal and external. Internal to the organization and external to the organization. So internal sources will include your offer letter, contract of employment, okay, employee handbook, then your policies, sometimes even your SOP, standard operating procedure, can provide good sources, especially if they are documented and well communicated. External sources could include, but not limited to, legislations. So let me give you an example of legislation. The labor law is a legislation. Then court proceedings, like the National Industrial Courts. That's why we always pay attention to all the rulings as they emerge, and we try to circulate them. Because if the court has ruled in a context, we know for certainty that any context that mirrors that, most likely the outcome is predetermined. Then court decision in general. So don't let anybody just think it is only your employee handbook that is guiding or binding. So you need to know what is happening generally. Why discipline in the workplace? Sometimes we have behavioral problems in the workplace, and there is need for supervisors or line managers to take action to ensure that the problem is contained and remedied. Sometimes if you don't contain or remedy it, what do? Other employees will start behaving it. Staff conduct and management response have the potential to affect not only productivity and employee morale, but also cause reputational damage to the organizational brand. This is very fundamental. A positive approach may also resolve or contain a problem before it worsens. In other words, you can nip it in the bud. However, discipline should be used carefully by following company policy while respecting the workers' rights. I'll take that again. Discipline should be used carefully by following the company's policy while respecting the workers' rights. It's very, very important. Somebody might have done a wrong thing. It doesn't mean you should treat them anyhow. You should treat them according to your policy, according to law. Don't say because they've done something bad, then you manhandle them or you maltreat them. They can go to court. While you may win the case for example, termination, you may also lose for wrong treatment and you may be told to pay damages, and it will put your organization in bad light as an employee of choice or the opposite of that. So what's a disciplinary committee? Okay, according to the dictionary, is a committee charged with examining alleged breaches of discipline within an organization, profession, and arbitrating on them. Arbitrating means taking a decision or taking a position on them. All right. The DC acts as the organization's conscience in all ramifications: fairness, equity, and justice. Fairness, equity, and justice are the disciplinary words. And it's also important that employees are committed to the organization's ethical principles in their acts, actions, carrying out oversight duties with respect to such commitment, acting as the advocate of the organization. Ethical principles cut across the organization and with respect to the employees. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very important that we must take precautions with respect to all acts and practices that may lead to the organization's reputation and image being harmed in the view of the law. Public opinion. Please note, public opinion. Let's add social media, okay, customers, because announcing such precautionary, you have to take care and ensure that you take precautionary measures throughout the organization. You need to ensure that we have appropriate measures by relevant departments to eliminate systematic erosion of organizational value. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in the past, distant past, the DC was said not to be a court of law and could not adjudicate on issues bordering on criminal offense. The Supreme Court of Nigeria have now shifted the law significantly, okay, and await a conviction before it can dismiss an employee for gross misconduct, even where the alleged offense committed by the employee is of a criminal nature, provided the employee is given fair hearing. All right. So, because sometimes if you wait for the matter to go to police and go to court, it can be in court for 5 years, for 10 years. So, would you still be paying the person as a staff? You can quickly dispense professionally with the situation and then make sure that all is well. So, I've logged the meeting now because we've maxed out. And why I logged the meeting is in case I am logged out. If I don't log the meeting and I'm logged out, I won't be able to join again because somebody will have taken the slot. Apologies. Ladies and gentlemen, what are some of the factors that will influence a disciplinary committee's effectiveness? In no particular order. The first of them is conflict of interest. I'll give you a tiny example. So if you are the petitioner in a case, for example, the example I gave where I said the wife of the MD complained that the cleaner didn't greet her. Now imagine how the organization set up a disciplinary committee to review the matter. The MD in this context cannot be a member of that panel. Why? There's conflict of interest. It is the wife that, in quotes, was offended or is alleging that she has been offended. So a conflict of interest can be anything. For example, if you are siblings or maybe there's something that connects you, so to a large extent, maybe you are from the same alma mater. It can be anything, but you need to be sensitive to it. All right. Integrity and impeccable knowledge of your present role. Now, all the people on the committee must be vast. They must have information, okay? They must be professional. And that's why sometimes, and I'm saying this with due respect, so you cannot set up a disciplinary committee, for example, and put an intern as a panel member. You need people who have worked for a while. I don't want to put a time lag to this. You understand? Because context matters. The way somebody who has spent 6 months in their professional career, we look at a matter will not be the same as somebody who has spent maybe 5 years or 10 years, as the case may be. Okay, you know, people will judge from their outlook, and somebody with 6 months, that's the only outlook to judge with, and they will think they are sincere. Meanwhile, if they have spent 5 years, 2 years longer on the job, they will probably have seen different contexts and be able to make necessary accommodation and allowance for peculiarities and context. Again, we must watch out for personal bias and prejudice. Okay, reputation and experience of the members of the committee. You need people, so don't put somebody on the committee that we know is double-mouthed, two-faced, or consistently lies, or panders to the public opinion instead of pandering to facts and data. People on the disciplinary committee must know the company policy and rules. In other words, they must have read all the employee handbook. They must be vast. So it is not as if they are just talking from their head or their mind. They are being guided by the company policy. They must generally have a robust understanding of the terms and conditions of employment in that organization, and also even of the industry. They should also have reasonable awareness and understanding of labor laws, International Labor Organization Convention, and so on and so forth. And that is why, let me quickly put this out there. So, you know, in some organizations, you may have a, so to speak, a standing or near permanent disciplinary committee, or a pool of people in your disciplinary committee. So just hypothetically, you may have 10 people on your disciplinary committee. So any case you are doing, maybe you have like 5 to 6 of them. So you don't have to have all the 10. But what you do 1 or 2 specialized training for the 10 people, where you run them through principles and concepts of the labor law, all the key items of your employee handbook, your sanctions grid, and so on and so forth, so that you train them, you enlighten them, you bring them to speed, so that they are almost like, you know, like miniature lawyer from their subject matter expertise and understanding of your law, your guidelines, your code. Now, in instances where maybe you don't have a standing disciplinary committee, maybe it's ad hoc. When an incident happens, you call them together. That is why, for example, if the disciplinary committee meeting is starting by 2 o'clock, maybe a day before, you might have had a 1-hour session or 30-minute session with the people, enlightening them, because you don't want them to start arguing emotionally. You don't want them to start arguing, you know, from a concept that is not legal or that is not contextual. You understand? Or you don't want them to be bringing matters that do not directly or indirectly correlate to the matter at hand. I give one funny example. You know, I've sat on the DC before, and when one of the DC members wanted to talk about the matter, the first thing he said is that, hey, that the lady that is facing DC, that the lady doesn't even, she's not friendly. My mind, what has being friendly or not being friendly got to do with the fact of the matter? That kind of statement can becloud the judgment of people on the call. So when you're a DC member, you will have been sensitized. And you don't just issue statements carelessly. You don't just bring points that can poison, pollute, or you know, put the accused in a good light, just like that. Okay, I hope we are getting value so far. I see a few people have dropped off, so I want to, yeah, I've unlocked the meeting now so that other people who are interested can join. So it's very, very important. You also need people on the DC committee who have utmost level of confidentiality, and they can maintain it. You don't want a situation where you do a DC today, maybe you've not even concluded with the resolution, and everybody in the company knows what happened. In fact, let me state it clear. The people on your DC should actually sign a non-disclosure agreement. Because you are on the DC will mean you'll be privy to information, conversation, evidence. Those information cannot be part of your gossip material. Like in one of the many organizations I work, so that don't bother to guess. We had a situation where there was an allegation of sexual harassment. Can I shock you? Do you know that some members of the DC committee reached out to HR and they were lobbying to be on the DC? Do you know why? They said this DC is going to be what? Is going to be interesting. That's the kind of details. So we imagine, and you know, people can join, and if you've ever been in a case that sexual harassment or intimidation before, the petitioner agreed that maybe for like 1 or 2 years, the dating or relationship was consensual. And then after things went sour, and that is where, in quotes, the harassment started. So you need to see the information, WhatsApp messages, videos. In fact, some of you are paying extra attention now. So it is because of this kind of information that people are lobbying to be on the panel. So you need people who have discretion. You need people who have what? Tact, who would not, outside that DC meeting, will not discuss with anybody, even their family member. I don't know, you are close to, maybe you have doctors as friends, spouses, family members. If anybody here can testify, if your brother or sister is a doctor and they talk to a patient, maybe that patient is your friend or somebody you know, and the patient leaves, and you ask your brother or sister that, what did that patient say? At least I'm speaking for the doctors I know, they will never tell you. Put a gun to a doctor's head and say, oh, that my friend that just left your office now. So what medical issue did he or she discuss with you? They will say, go and ask your friend. Now, if your friend on his or her own relation decides to share, now people who are on the DC must be that confidential. Ladies and gentlemen, it is what? Very, very important. You don't know where the information will lead to, and so on and so forth. Again, let's assume, hypothetically, that you have 5 members of the DC, or you have 7 members of the DC. It is important that each member can think independently. Let me give an example. You know, you can have a DC panel, and the hierarchy in terms of the grade. So just to put in context, maybe you have somebody that is an assistant general manager, you have a deputy general manager, then you have 2 senior managers, then you have 3 managers. You see, in the DC, all the members of the DC are equal. So it's not a situation where everybody will now be deferring to the assistant general manager. Now, if the AGM, for example, is the chairman of the DC, because of his post as the chairman, in fact, in most DCs, the chairman or chairperson may not even vote, except there is a tie of the other panel members. Then he will now have like a tie-breaking vote. Do you understand? Now, outside the DC, I can be saying, Oga Misa, my Oga at the top. But I'm saying in the context of the DC, we are all maybe 6 members, still panel members with 1 vote. No hierarchy. Now, anybody can have a position. You can sell your position to the committee members with fact and figure. Not, oh, I've spent 24 years in this organization. You have just spent 6. No. As long as whoever chose the committee has approved that person as a committee member. Gloria Steinem said that whenever one person stands up and says, wait a minute, this is wrong, this helps other people to do the what? The same. So we are looking at facts. We are looking at figures, please. It's not just opinion. I hope I'm making sense. All right. NIC generally over the years has based its decision on staff disciplinary matters on some of the following criteria or factors, okay? Existence of staff handbook and manual. And let me say this so I don't forget. And I've seen, some of the things we have seen, it is well. Just let me say it is well. I've seen an organization, more than oneself, that will tell you to sign an employee handbook that they won't give you the copy. They'll just share, a page that says, I have read and acknowledged. I've seen organizations that they'll be referring to policy that is not available. You may be shocked that if the court has evidence that a policy or document is not generally accessible to the staff, it may not reckon with that policy. Because if you, the employer or HR or CEO, you are the only one with the policy, then it's just like the Nigerian Constitution. Anybody in the world has access to it. Either you can download it online or buy it at the bookshop. But imagine only the Nigerian court or the Nigerian legislators, senators, House of Rep have it. So please pay attention to that, because some of us make that mistake. We say, oh, there is a document. Is it accessible? Is it available? Have you made concerted effort to come? And that's why this is not just about onboarding for new staff. Maybe once in a year, do a 2-3 hour session of your employee handbook as part of your training program. Run people through the key highlights. Record it. Let employees also sign or acknowledge digitally that they went through. Because when the court also says that genuinely, intentionally, purposefully, they are letting people understand your policies. They also look at your procedural action. I'm not a lawyer, but just to put it there, that procedure, for example, can be processed. Let me give you an example. Did you give the employee a query? That's one process. Did the employee respond to the query? That's another process. Did you set up a disciplinary committee? That can be another process. Did you give the employee notice to attend this? You might have seen this before, but I've seen it. I've been in a situation where somebody issued a query and said, in the next 30 minutes, explain why disciplinary process action should not be taken against you. Now, if you are not careful, from that employee or manager or supervisor perspective, he will claim that I followed process. What's the process? Issue query. But the court can look at it that is 30 minutes reasonable for somebody to receive a query. You know that there are some queries, maybe technical in nature. In other words, you may want to review data, information, analyze facts so that you can respond appropriately. The court, for example, can determine that even though you gave the query, the time notice is not reasonable. And that's why you typically see on the average 24 hours, 48 hours, and so on and so forth. Let me give another example around timing I've seen. Somebody will issue a query at 4:30, and they will say something that before close of business today, you must respond to the query. If you go to court, sometimes the court can say you issue the query at 4:30, and they will check your employee handbook, that was your work hours. Maybe it's 8 to 5. It is you that will say, oh, by close of business, you mean any time. It can be 9, it can be 10. So you need to be reasonable, and your words need to appear reasonable. So let me say this, when you are running the disciplinary process, always think from an external perspective. In other words, if a neutral person that is not in your organization reads it, if we give it to 10 people, will 8 or 9 of the 10 think it is fair and reasonable? We call it the reasonable man's test. So don't just let maybe your CEO or your chairman put you under undue pressure and you will do anyhow. Okay, you can be embarrassed. All right. So that's why we also have rules of what? Natural justice. Is it naturally okay? And when we talk about natural justice, if you ask 10 people, at least 7 to 8 of them will reason the same way. Note, I didn't say all the time, we may not always all be rational at the same way, the same time. We may have our mood, we may be having speculation, but the simple majority of any group of people, when they see the details, they will take a similar position. natural justice, equity, and good. Ladies and gentlemen, does it align with what? Good conscience? Is it in good faith? Is it in alignment with ILO conventions and best practice? All right. Is there traces of bias? Is there traces of malice? I'll give you an example. So maybe I've had issues with a particular manager, maybe in another department, maybe like 3-4 times. We've had altercations. Maybe people in the organization department even knows that X and Y don't really get along. Then X contravenes the company policy and is facing a disciplinary committee. Then you now put Y as a member of that panel. Do you follow my story? Now, except you are short staff, for the sake of avoiding any trace of bias or malice, please step X down from that panel, because it's already established that in recent times or in the recent time past, they've had one too many squabbles. I'm sure there'll be other independent professionals, colleagues in the organization that they've probably never really interacted or had never. So these are, I'm just trying to give you evidence of traces of bias. Or I'm just saying, maybe a particular man had been asking a woman out repeatedly and the lady didn't answer positively from the man's perspective. And people already know. Then that woman commits, in quotes, a genuine offense. Then you now make that man the chairman of the disciplinary committee. You can see that you are already creating traces of what? Bias and malice. So that's why sometimes when you are inviting people to join a committee, apart from doing your due diligence, asking around, and based on your knowledge, sometimes it's also okay to even ask the nominees that, oh, we want to put you on the panel for so-so person, so-so case. Is there anything we need to know as to why you may not be eligible to be a panel member in this case? I've been in a situation where somebody said, look, how and this person, we attend the same church. We've been in the same church for 15 years. In good conscience, I don't know how I'll be able to handle this case, because people from the religious organization may even begin to intercede, and they step the guy down. You see that now, you will say, what has church got to do? But the guy said, we've been in the same church for 18 years. It may be material, on a lighter note, maybe, this on a lighter note, please. Maybe the people on the disciplinary committee are largely Chelsea fans. Then the person facing the DC is an Arsenal fan. You can see that there can be what? Trace of bias or malice. That's on the lighter note, ladies and gentlemen. It must align with what? Constitutionality, and it must avoid any form of what? Illegality. St. Augustine said, an unjust law is no law at all. An unjust law is no what? Is no law at all. So let me see if I can move faster now, even though, when you are looking at the DC process, you are trying to find out the truth. The members of the panel or the chairman of the panel must avoid incriminating what? Statements. Okay. There are things that you need to watch out for. All right. Don't try to infer without data, without fact, without evidence. Okay. No assumptions, please. What is not on the table is not on the table. What we don't have evidence for, we don't have evidence for. Sorry that I'm sort of using feminine examples. It's just what is coming to my head. So I've been in a panel before, and one of the panel said, no wonder our marriage didn't work. HR, we were 2 HR people in that, we had to immediately caution that person. In fact, we first of all suspended the DC process and asked the person to apologize. Because what has the fact that she's a divorcee got to do with the issue at hand in the workplace? That's an inciting statement, because you are trying to say, in quotes, that if somebody is not in her husband's house or is divorced, that it means that person is liable for every other wrong thing in the workplace. There are no correlations. You may be in your husband's house and be stealing at work. And you may not be in your husband's house and never touch anybody's money. So we need to be guided. No careless utterances, no assumptions. There must be facts and there must be what? Evidence. ladies and gentlemen, let's look at some things in the DC, process. Ask the right questions. Leading questions, a question that prompts or encourages the answer wanted. Follow-up questions. Follow-up questions are the questions you ask after you ask something and you want to know more about what the speaker is telling you. What, how, where, who, which, and why. Look at the evidence vis-a-vis the charge. And you must also go beyond every reasonable doubt. Let me quickly forget. Okay. When somebody is facing a DC, typically there is a charge or there is an offense. Stick to the charge, or it can be multiple, maybe 3 charges or 3 offenses. Stick to the 3 offenses. Don't let somebody in the process of the DC come and bring a 4th and a 5th charge. No, saying this. You see, the disciplinary process at work also mirrors the judicial system. We have the police, then we have the courts. Are we together? Sometimes in the organization, the police may be, I'm choosing my words carefully now, maybe, I'm not saying must be. So if you have like an internal audit department, that may be the police. Then HR is like the court. You are the neutral person. Or the line manager sometimes can be the police. In other words, they are the petitioner. So there is a charge. Okay. So all charges must be proven beyond reasonable doubt. And that's why if you go to court, if you cannot prove a specific case beyond reasonable doubt, and then you want to bring other cases, except to go and amend the charge, the judge will throw it out. We also need to be careful so that people are not just bringing things that have no relationship with the charge or charges. Okay? Make sure that when you are drawing conclusion, you are drawing it from the charge and the evidences relating to the charge. Okay, so it's not anyhow. It's not anyhow. Why are we going through this process? It's not just for us as HR, it's also letting our DC members and also our line managers. Desmond Tutu said that inside of what? Of the oppressor. So as HR, we must make sure we've put a system in place that is for the truth in the context of the organization. Now, let's quickly look at a very short query. Now, I need you to see the logic in the query. A query can be, I've seen 2-page queries. In fact, I've seen 4-page, in fact, I've seen a 6-page query. So it's not about the length or the brevity, but it is about certain salient factors, which you will see here. Now, let me read out the query for us, ladies and gentlemen. A review of time and attendance reports for May 2015. Note, you know what time and attendance report is? That is a document. You can see a review of, we did not say somebody said you are coming late. Because if you say somebody said you are coming late, you see that you are on gas. A review of time and attendance report for, we were specific, May 2025. Reviews that you were late 13 times, we were specific, in the month of May 2025. This amounts to habitual lateness to work. As you are aware, habitual lateness to work is an offense punishable in line with Section 4.2 of the XYZ Organization Consequence Management Grid. In the query already, we are already showing you what your offense is. We have showed you the source of the documents or evidence of the offense, and we are telling you in our organization is XYZ organization. We are already pointing to our code in organizational code, your offense. You should therefore explain in writing within 24 hours of receipt of this query why appropriate disciplinary action should not be taken against you. You are to acknowledge the receipt of this query by signing and returning the attached copies to the other side. Ladies and gentlemen, if you issue a query to a staff and you cannot tie it to any corresponding consequence management, any corresponding breach in your employee handbook. You never start to. I'm deliberately pausing here. I'm trying to get all of us here to help our line managers improve our query. So don't just mention an offense without linking it. You see, the moment you link it to the employee handbook specifically, and you mention section, subsection, the reason is that in the employee handbook, if it is standard, emphasis on if it is standard, we have what we call consequence management grid, where we have listed or categorized group of offenses and their sanction. Let me quickly stay there. So the job of the disciplinary committee is not actually to determine the sanction to give some. It is because I'm reiterating. I'm not short of material or short of words. I need all of us to leave this meeting tonight with this understanding. The job of the disciplinary committee is not to determine the punishment. Please note it. The job of the disciplinary committee is to determine whether the employee facing the DC is guilty or innocent. So if the person is innocent, we drop the charge. Everybody go. If the person is guilty, it is the employee handbook, which the HR is typically the custodian, that will tell us what the sanction is. So you see, I've seen organizations where, and you can drop in the chat box if you have if you have experienced this, where the MD will just say suspend him for 2 weeks, suspend that one for 3 days. No. Nobody in the organization must have the unilateral discretion to be dispensing punishment as they deem fit. Before anybody has committed any offense, we must have itemized all the categories of offenses and the sanctions for them. So when somebody commits an infraction, you issue them a query like this. Look at the query as a title. We put the source of the evidence, which any neutral person can verify and validate. We put the section of our employee handbook or organizational sanctions grid that has been what? Breached, so that if you breach it, you too know, you already know your sanction if you are guilty, except you can come and convince the panel that you are not what? Guilty. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I can see our comments and thoughts. Please, let's keep them coming. Again, this is advisory. You don't have to follow anything I'm saying here. If it is 1 or 2 areas you pick and you improve your disciplinary process, I am content. You don't need to take everything I'm dispensing tonight. 1 or 2 to reinforce yourself. I'm happy. So again, you can generally, okay, a DC can be informal or formal, and you don't have to use the word informal and informal. But in this context, what I mean by informal is, sanctions not greater than a first written warning, typically dealt with by the employee, supervisor, or manager. So the HOD or supervisor can initiate a disciplinary committee. Of course, they will involve their HR business partner in the whole thing. Now, a formal DC, this will be now initiated by the HR. Okay, and it has potential sanctions greater than first written warning, up to final written warning, dismissal, termination. So this formal one, there is a possibility that this person will be out of the organization. That is why we have termed it formal. You can use any nomenclature for it. This is just thoughts I'm sharing. It's not as if this is the way. So you can even decide to have 3 levels of disciplinary hearing. Maybe minor misdemeanor, semi-minor misdemeanor, and then gross misconduct. Whatever works for you is to know, what disciplinary actions should end with the HOD, which should get to the management. You understand? So, for example, there's no way you want to sack or terminate anybody in any organization that it won't get to the CEO, because if the matter goes to court, the CEO will know whether you want or not. I hope you are finding this session very useful and picking some useful tips here and there. Now, let me quickly show us something. All right. So I want to, what I'm showing right now is what I've called the role of panel members. Please, it doesn't mean you must have everything. You may also have some things that is not showing on this schematic. One, this schematic is not exhaustive, and so your own, you may just have only 4. You may also have 20. So please, I don't want anybody to be pigeon-owned and say, Oluyemi said security. What if you don't have security department in your organization? It's just to give you some perspective. So in no particular order, but this one is advice you should have. You should have a presiding officer or a chairman or a chairperson. Okay, typically that person may introduce the panel members, provide guidelines on the process, moderate the questioning of respondents, and coordinate voting. Okay. If it is a matter that you're investigating your internal audit, for example, or your compliance, you know, then they may come and present their findings. Sometimes they present it 2 ways. One, they will have submitted a document that they will have read up in issue, and they will present it in presence if they still want to contest or challenge anything. If you have legal departments, so please, this is from my heart to you. Always get them to be on your panel. Even if they are not voting and they are guardian, they may also vote. So if you want them on your panel, it means you may also want to get their availability before you schedule any disciplinary hearing. You know that if anything ends in court at the end of the day, it will not be a legal matter. Bring lawyers in at the end, them from the beginning or as early as possible, because they can tell you that we are right, but from the legal perspective, we are wrong. Let's drop the matter on the nature of the disciplinary infraction. So there are some infractions that are technical. Let me give you an example. Forgive me, but this is the example that is coming to mind. So if you want to say a medical doctor was negligent in his duty, maybe a surgeon was negligent in the way he conducted the surgery, you must necessarily have 1, 2, 3 other. And I can see my sister on this call, Wofi. She works in the hospital. I don't know her specific title, but I know she's in charge of the practice and she's HR for the hospital. If imagine maybe the head of the hospital in this context is not a doctor, and then you have people that are not doctors and you are trying to determine medical negligence, you need 2, 3 doctors to join that call. So I just use medicine so it can be an engineer. You need 1, 2, 3 other engineers. It may be a sales issue. You need 1, 2, 3 other salespeople. Why? For context, robust context. So, I hope you get that. There are also some disciplinary situations where you may want to arrest the staff. Maybe the person has stolen money or something. Then your security, you want to get in touch with them, brief them. They may advise on how to pick the person or how not to pick the person, and so on and so forth. Of course, HR, you must be there now. This is our job, or it's part of our house. Typically, a report will have been sent to them, investigative report, summary of maybe the query, the response of the employee and everything, maybe 2 days or 1 week to the panel. The panel members should have read it. Some panel members, they will not read the report. They will now be asking jam questions in the panel. Forgive my French. That's not professional or proper. Okay, so they should review the case sent to them before hearing, treat it with utmost confidentiality, and they should avoid arguing unnecessarily. When I say arguing, I mean 2, 3 panel members arguing with themselves in the presence of the employee facing the DC. Maybe when you have excused the person facing DC, we can argue. But you don't want a situation where the employee will begin to infer bias, prejudice, discord, dissonance in the midst of the panel. Okay. So I also put here, I said observers. And I'm trying to be as liberal and open-minded as possible. So there are instances where, depending on the nature of the case, maybe you're in a unionized environment. In your organization, you may say, okay, for every DC, you put a union member as an observer there. Why? So that the union member will see the transparency and the thought process to ensure that there's no malice. In some instances, the union member too may make him a member of the panel that can vote, depending on the organization. You may also have witnesses. So the person you call to face the panel may call witnesses. Witnesses may include, for example, colleagues, and also situations where witnesses may be customers, and so on, and so forth. So that's why I put here observers. Please, this is not exhaustive. Okay, there can be peculiarities, and so. But I hope this has broadened your mind, and you have seen how you should have people from different perspectives, and the likely role they can play, the kind of value they add to the conversation. So let's quickly look at how to interpret sanctions. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are getting value for your time this evening. You know, sometimes there are some topics when you run it, some people will say this thing is basic, this thing is simple. But go to the National Industrial Court. It is the seemingly basic things that is putting big organizations in big trouble. Okay, so let's look at how to interpret some of these sanctions or situations or context. Again, you need to look at the nature of the matter. And each matter, even when two matters look alike, they may not be the same. And let me quickly state here, you know, there can be this temptation for management or HR that you've done a particular matter, maybe in March. A almost similar matter now happens in May. If you are not careful, you just go and bring the same panel that handled the March one to come and handle the May one. It may be a blessing, but it may be a burden. The reason is they will now be on autopilot when reviewing the case of May. So sometimes it may be good to go and bring a fresh set of panel members who are not connected with the first one. So they are asking the right questions. They are not assuming that they know the outcome, or they know that the person is guilty, or they know the nature of, because if you look at it, they need to be dispassionate and professional. It's just like a doctor. You've been seeing patient after patient. Each patient is a first patient. You are not comparing that patient with the last 3 patients that left your table or your desk. Otherwise, you may miss out. So 3 people can have malaria, but one can have malaria with other symptoms. One may even have malaria with maybe the person has malaria but is also diabetic. Another may have malaria but is also hypertensive. Then one has just malaria. So you can't just say, oh, it looks alike. We need to be careful about that. So the nature of the matter, audit findings. So in addition to audit, let me say investigative findings, because it's not only audit that does investigation. Whoever the team, the individual that did the investigation, you want to check it. Findings by the panel members during the DC. They must make sure that the offense match the sanction in relations to the sanction grade. You also want to look at culpability. And by culpability here, so let me just say this. Sometimes somebody can be a primary offender and somebody can be a secondary offender. Let me give you an example that we can relate with. And I want us to ponder and reflect on it. Do you know that if, for example, so let's say I am an officer and I have a supervisor. So it is my job as the officer to do, keep some records every day. It is the job of my supervisor to check my records every week. So the officer, maybe I've been making errors in the records. Then my supervisor that is checking every week, maybe due to omission, has just been approving. There are 2 people that are offenders in this context. Hire the officer that is primarily responsible for the data keeping or updates. In this context, we can say I'm the primary offender. While my supervisor, who is supposed to be providing what? Oversight, is the secondary offender. So in some cases, both the primary and secondary offender can get the same sanction. In some cases, I may get a higher sanction and the supervisor gets a slightly lower sanction, because we can say he's doing 20 things and doing only 3. So I hope you get that slight analogy with respect to primary or secondary or offender. And that is also to get us to think about how offenses can be. Also, in interpreting sanctions, and looking at reviewing situations, you also need to look at the intention. That's what we mean by intent. Is there the likelihood or peculiarity of a pecuniary gain? Then sometimes you also want to look at the previous records. Maybe somebody has spent 18 years in the company and has been coming on time. Let's put it that way. Then in 1 month, the person comes late 13 times after 18 years of service. So if you look at the previous record of the 17 years, come on. Do you get where previous, where the person is just 6 months in the organization, and then the way you look at it, you may not have, so to speak, previous legacy positively to speak to you. Peculiar gain again means maybe I will get money, I'll get commission, I'll get a bribe, or they said, don't worry, if you allow this thing, we'll give you a gift, or we'll give you a voucher, and so on and so forth. So all these dynamics can affect the outcomes, okay? So you want to look at the sanctions to be applied. You want to look at if there are explanatory circumstances. I've seen a situation where, for example, a panel saw that an individual was guilty, but when they looked at all the explanatory circumstances, they recommended clemency from management, but they stated the reason. Now, it was not really their job to come and recommend, so they determined that this person is guilty, but they now listed 1, 2, 3 explanatory circumstances and asked for the sanction to be stepped at that. Of course, that was now at the discretion of the management to approve or overrule, as the case may be. You recall that throughout today's conversation, we have been speaking about consequence grade, codes of offenses, and so on and so forth. So don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that there are some tools that we use, and we mentioned all of them. Can issue a query, okay, and typically you put copies of the query in the file, okay. I know nowadays queries are electronic, so you send an email, the person responds. Sometimes the line manager sends a query to an employee, then copies HR, depending on the level of organization. You could also have what we call caution. Okay, and let me say this. There is this one we call verbal caution. So verbal caution means you use mouth to caution somebody. But do you know that if you actually caution somebody like that and you want it on record, you document that a verbal caution was issued to so. Even though it's a verbal caution, it doesn't mean that because it's a verbal caution that it cannot be in writing. I hope you understand what I mean. So verbal or written cautions are for minor one-off misdemeanors with no major impact on the business. For example, maybe somebody comes late to a meeting. It can be a routine meeting, maybe not a meeting with a regulator, a meeting with a client. Poor arrangement of meeting. Maybe the person is supposed to make refreshment available or certain logistics. Okay, you don't want that to be reviewed at a DC. All right. Again, you now need to put some things in place. For example, according to some organizations' employee handbook, if you get like 3 cautions in 1 year, then you may face this. Because it's like your level of misdemeanor is 1 too many. Then you can have what? A warning, where an offense is not sufficiently serious to warrant summary dismissal or termination or suspension. So it can be first written warning. If you do the thing again, or do something similar within a space of time, second written warning, third written warning, or final written warning. Okay, very, very important. Then suspension. So this is also slightly dicey. We'll talk about this more detail in some other webinars, or somebody else will handle it. But just to say that the suspension can, an organization at its discretion, but must be okay. This may be punitive or for investigation purpose. Punitive suspension should not exceed a number of days. Ignore the date I put here. So it should, because quickly, maybe 5 days, 3 days, 1 week, max, maybe 2 weeks. Okay. Meanwhile, for investigation too, it should not be long, because if you suspend somebody for 1 month, for example, and you're investigating, don't forget that if the outcome of the investigation is that the person is innocent, you will still pay the person for work that they didn't do. And let me say this one in black and white, clear. There is nothing called working suspension. No. It's either the person is on suspension or is working, please. There's nothing called working suspension that you say the person is suspended, but the person is coming to work. Please, 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 please. I know that some of us that work in owner-managed business, aka one-man business, we face this a lot. There is nothing called working suspension. You are either working or on suspension. So make sure you do investigations quickly. So, for example, maybe you first of all suspend the person for 2 weeks. And do your investigation. But 2 weeks is 14 days. Maybe on the 12th, 13th day, sincerely, you cannot conclude the investigation. Then you can exit for 3 months for investigation. What are you investigating? Are you going to heaven? You understand? So when you suspend during investigation, it will be with pay. Say, for instances, where the infractions have financial implications or are fraud related, which shall be without pay. And in your suspension letter, communicate whether it's with pay or without pay, and the reason for it being with pay or without pay. You know, if you don't communicate on this, you just say you are suspended. That you are suspended doesn't by default mean that it's without pay. And I'm speaking from experience. Some people have been suspended. They went to court. The 6 months or 1 year they collected everything. The court said you didn't state in the suspension, and there is no justification for it to be what without pay. Let me begin to attempt to bring this to some conclusion so that we'll take a few comments. I have another program appointment shortly. So it's very important. Sometimes when employees are on suspension, it may be appropriate to collect your company property. It may be ID card, laptop, work tools. Their email, for example, you default it to another colleague so that the mails that are coming in, you may also disable them from seeing the mail from their own personal phone or personal device. Some HR make this mistake. You place somebody on suspension and they are still getting all the information just because you didn't remember. So you should have a checklist. Okay. Sometimes the employees on suspension may not have access to the company premise, except you are the one sending for him to come and provide explanation or clarity or something. So some of these things, very important, very, very important. Termination of employment. Employment can be terminated where an employee's conduct is detrimental to the company, you know, but you need to follow due process and you need to provide a reason, a reasonable reason. Okay, summary dismissal, things like fraud, stealing, murder, rape, you know, sexual harassment, those kind of things. Again, it must be in line with your employee code. As much as possible, have evidences, documented evidence, and as much as possible also ensure that there's what fair hearing. Again, sanctions can be divided, and this is me, you know, just coming up with this. You can have misdemeanor and examples of misdemeanor, because some people have problems with this. Maybe lateness to work, okay, and nothing is cast in stone. You may not agree with everything here. Eating cooked meals at the work desk. Some organizations you can eat at the work desk. Some organizations you cannot eat. Excessive use of office telephone. So imagine maybe somebody is using the office telephone for personal call excessively. You know, if maybe you have an emergency, call once or twice, maybe it's okay. But almost every day or every other day, you know, so those kind of things. Sales of wares of any kind. I'm not talking to anybody. I don't have people from side also here. You know, you're at work, but you are selling t-shirts to your colleagues. There are some organizations. Let me even say this one. I've worked in places where, for example, maybe in your church, you are doing harvest or fundraising. You now give your colleagues at work envelope that will come and contribute. They call it solicitation. But it is stated in the employer handbook. So you can't come here and come and say, in my church or in my mosque, we are raising building fund. But all those offenses are what captured. So it's not somebody thinking that it is good or bad. It is stated in the employer handbook. I hope those examples are clear. Again, from Ms.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, the network has come again. We expect Dr. Adeosun to join us, but in the meantime, what we can do to save time, because he will need to join another commitment he's having shortly. Let's keep our questions coming in the chat box. Please, let's type our questions in the chat box. So the moment he joins the call again, he will quickly address all our questions. Please keep the questions coming so that we won't have to ex-
Sorry for that interruption as we coast home. I'm back. Happy to be back. Very happy to be back. So I just want to show a few examples. Again, nothing is cast in stone here, but if you don't provide specific examples, some of us learn better when we see, and that's why I approach. So, prevalent exam, likely um, sanction. Again, suggested in your organization, what some people think is minor may be major to you, and what some people think is major may be minor to you. Context matters. Okay, so don't.
So sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, the network is not friendly at all this evening. It's showing Dr. Adeosun Shege Pro Max.
So the first one. So let me say there are two types of offenses. Let me just say this. I'm coming up with this crafting. imagine, networks, three networks. It will have been four, if not that the fourth one. I won't mention their name. We don't even know whether they are dead or not. Can guess them if you know. Let me just catch my breath and let me see if the network will cooperate. Okay, so poor quality of work or failing to maintain levels. So poor quality of the work, but it's
Again, we just have to keep apologizing for the way the network is misbehaving tonight. For a moment, Dr. Adeosun was even sounding like a robot or computer, because the network was really, really bad. Uh, Maybe when it comes, we'll just tell him to quickly round up and then take questions. That's why we say we should probably drop your message, your questions in the chat box. Dr. Adeosun is back.
man. For the network tonight, from my hand, this poor quality of work and also failure to maintain what output levels. So let me just rush through. So here I put the sanction as what? First written warning. Then acts of dishonesty. Note how generic some things are. You can tell me what can be part of act of dishonesty. For example, maybe the person has joined, you now went to do certificate verification. That is a lie. The person didn't do NYC. Act of what? Dishonesty. So it can be, many things can cover it. Contravention of company policy. Yes, so Uncle K, all of them will face this first thing tomorrow morning. Don't forget that you have many policies at work, SOPs, and so on and so forth. Contravening any of them, for example, first written warning. Failing on the part of the employee to do the amount and quality of work required of an employee in financial or legal or regulatory risk, we put first written warning. Failing to report incidents of what? Gifts or money taken or given, which could be construed as being an intention to influence action, we put this in. Dereliction of neglect of duty or failure to perform clearly defined job function. So you can see that this one and poor quality of work may be similar, but we still put them separate so that there will be no hiding place for the lazy, unproductive employee. Last but not least, in the samples I'm using here, breach of safety rules that result to fatality of employees and or third parties. Look at this dismissal. So I hope you see how, and you can have 100 lists, 50, 80. So the first thing is draw your mind. What are the kind of offenses that has ever been committed before? Cover it. Speak to people in your industry. Cover it. There are some things that are general and generic. Cover it. All right. So that again, and this is what I'm saying, that if somebody is facing this, for example, for breach of safety rules, and there is fatality, the job of the DC is to what? Is the person guilty or innocent? If he's guilty, it is what? Dismissal. There's no story about it. Let me quickly rush through the remaining few slides or pages here. So again, not all organizations do this, but I think it's helpful. There should be timelines to our sanction. By timelines, I mean validity period. So some people, they committed an offense 3 years ago, and it's still haunting them 3 years after. Okay, so we suggest that sanctions should have validity. For example, maybe documented verbal warning after 3 months should what? Expire. In other words, you can't use it in a future case or reference. Then maybe first written warning, for example, can also have 3 months. Final written warning, you see, is of a higher degree or consequence. We say 6 months. And let me explain what it means. So if you got final written warning in January for an offense, then in May, which is 5 months later, you commit another offense, you face DC, and sanction is final warning. But it's within validity period of the first final one. Because it's that we will upgrade your sanction next severe one, which means you will be what? Terminated. But if you have been patient, you commit one in January, you now put the second one in September. The first final written warning will have what? Expired. And you commit another offense that is final written warning, you will collect final written warning. But if by November you commit another offense that is supposed to be final written warning, because the second final written warning is in operation, is valid, you will be terminated. I hope you get the drift. If you are suspended, because this, so to speak, very severe, anything above suspension and termination, this will be valid for 1 year. And there are organizations where, for example, all policies to disciplinary policy. For example, I know organizations, when they are doing promotion, you must not have been suspended or even final warning in the year of the promotion. Did you copy that? If it is a year of promotion and you have been suspended within 12 months of that promotion, my apologies, man. The thing is any matter explaining you, but we will finish. We will finish. Well, light and lie, we'll finish. So you've gotten that gist or conversation around validity. So if you don't have, you may want to do that in your organization. Again, it's not fair to judge somebody for the rest of their career in the organization. Otherwise, some employees will begin to leave. Even though they are good, they might have made honest mistake. Now, you may have provision that, oh, if somebody faces DC and they are convicted or after action, they are guilty and they are issued their penalty or their consequence. You know, the person may appeal, but you can't just appeal for appealing. And when you appeal, for example, maybe you appeal to the head of HR or you appeal to the MD, there must be certain minimum conditions that should be satisfied for the appeal to hold water. Again, this is not exhaustive, but in my opinion and experience, if there is new evidence, and evidence that is germane, but maybe for one reason or the other was not available in the initial process of the disciplinary process, new evidence, or if there is alleged procedural irregularity in the process now that this is followed, vis-a-vis, for example, your own employee handbook, and the person can show it, then if there's also perceived or alleged substantive unfairness, all right, so HR may reconstitute the committee, for example, appealing, and the appeal is sustained, which means the appeal will set a fresh committee. Nobody in the former committee will be in this new one, except it is a case of new evidence. If it is a case of new evidence, you can bring everybody on the former panel here so that they will now see the new evidence and then they will review their judgment if necessary. But if it is procedural irregularity or substantive unfairness, because they were part of the process or they were the people that were unfair, then they cannot be a judge in this new case. All right. So very important, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. for listening to me today. Apologies for the hiccups. All right. Just like to take a few comments or contributions. Okay. I don't expect questions on the lighter note, but if there are any questions, please ask quickly so that we can wrap up. So I'm seeing something here. I'm trying to read it first. I don't want to read it out first. I want to read it first to see, because if the general context has provided the response, I won't respond, so that we're not taking a case by case. It's because we're trying to look at a framework. So I'm checking this. So if you want to speak, okay, please raise your hands and we'll enable you. So I'm looking at Abdul. So I'm not reading the case out, but my question is, do you have, so I'm asking you questions back. Do you have a consequence grid? In your consequence grid, did it state that if you are sent a mail on a public holiday that the federal government recognized and the employee did not see the mail on the public holiday, does your sanction grid state that your punishment should be 1 month salary deduction? If you have listened to me today, you already know my position on that. Nobody should, it's not after an offense that somebody will determine the sanction. The sanction should be already in your consequence grid. So that may show you that you may need, as an organization, to review your consequence grid so that people don't use discretion. Okay, I hope I've been helpful. I don't want to go to the specific details of your question. That's why we did this entire webinar. So if you didn't join from the beginning, listen to the recording. You will see the answers to your question. All you have is for my sister. Oluchi, you can try to unmute. The network is showing me shady. I don't seem to see Oluchi again. Okay. Any comments, any contributions before we call it a wrap tonight? Oh, Oluchi has been thrown off the network. Any other person wants to say something, share something, at least let me hear one voice, at least tonight. Otherwise, I will call Titi or Victoria. Titi wants to say something. Let's wrap up. Or Uncle K, let's wrap up.
Okay, we have Oladele's hand up. We have Oluchi. Oluchi is speaking. Go ahead, Oluchi.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Dr. Adeji, thank you so much for a detailed presentation. You mentioned about changing, not having the same people run the disciplinary committee always. That is important, because sometimes you have some people that might want to, the disciplinary committee members are meant to be impartial, but sometimes you find a situation where one person might be might speak the loudest and might want to influence other people outside the sanction grid. So changing them for having different members for different issues, having different members for different issues is very, very important. It helps to maintain fairness and objectivity. That's my contribution.
Thank you so much, Ma. Thank you. Any other contributions? All right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We have come to the end of tonight's session. Again, it will be uploaded tonight. Check the YouTube channel, Oluyemi Adeosun. You can listen to it again and again, and also share with friends and colleagues who you think will benefit tremendously from tonight's session. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Adeosun. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you so much. In spite
Thank
of
you,
network
sir.
challenges, you are still able to
Thank
finish.
you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.